Hej och välkomna till det här seminariet som vi har, Möter vi barns behov i Sverige. Jag är Ingvild Segersam, ordförande för riksorganisationen HARO. Och vi har jobbat i över 30 år med frågor som rör barn. Först var väl fokus på att man ska uppvärdera arbetet med barn oavsett omsorgsform, oavsett om man har barnen hemma eller i skola eller i förskola, så ska det vara någonting som uppvärderas, någonting som är viktigt och någonting som uppskattas av samhället. Det har vi jobbat för. Men de senare åren så har vi känt att mer och mer fokus blir på barnen. Alltså hur mår barnen? Alltså den psykiska ohälsan som ökar och hur man ser att barn mår inte bra. Och det är någonting som vi vill ska pratas mer om, som vi vill ska lyftas på alla nivåer, både bland föräldrar, bland de som arbetar med barnen och även politiker och beslutsfattare. Så det är därför vi anordnar det här seminariet, och vi är jätteglada att det kom så många, för då känner vi att då finns det lite hopp. För då är vi fler som får kunskapen och börjar agera utifrån den, då kan vi få en förändring. Och för att ge lite mer bakgrundskunskap, lite information om läget i Sverige. Och då vill jag presentera Jonas som ska ge lite information. Han är vår familjepolitiska expert i HARO. Och han är även projektledare på det här seminariet. Varsågod.
Tack så mycket, Ingrid. Möter vi barns behov i Sverige? Det är en fråga man kan ställa sig. Och man kan fråga sig, varför ställer vi en sån fråga i Sverige idag? Är det intressant med barns behov? Bakgrunden är förstås att barn och unga idag inte mår så bra som de borde. Den som följer med i media kan läsa det regelbundet här. Och jag vet att många av er som jobbar inom skola, som lärare, psykologer och på annat sätt ser det varje dag att många barn inte mår så bra som de borde. Man kan ju fråga sig lite grann, vi är världens bästa land som har hög levnadsstandard och ett fantastiskt välfärdssystem, så borde rimligtvis våra barn må jättebra. Men vi vet att det inte sker riktigt så. Vad är det som händer? Så att vad vi har tänkt här idag är att försöka ge en ny infallsvinkel på det här. Och lite grann i analogi med vad Ingrid berättade här. Vi börjar bli allt mera bekymrade över att barn i allmänhet inte mår så bra. Vi som engagerade föräldrar i HARO skulle gärna vilja belysa det lite grann. Låt oss titta på några fakta som jag tror att många av er känner till. Vi vet att många yngre barn mår bra, det brukar man säga. Och självklart säger vi då att det vore konstigt annars om de inte mådde bra jämfört med många andra länder i världen. Men bara för en vecka sedan så kom en rapport från Socialstyrelsen om att svenska 15-åringar mår sämre än andra jämförbara välfärdsländer. Det var för några veckor sedan i Metro en undersökning från Stockholms universitet som visade att var tredje 16-årig gymnasieelev var kroniskt stressad. 8% av dem var så stressade att det kunde jämföras med utbränning för vuxna. Den psykiska ohälsan hos barn och unga försämras snabbare i Sverige än i 11 andra jämförbara länder enligt en statlig utredning från 2006. Svenska skolresultat når knappt upp till genomsnittet i OECD-länderna enligt PISA-studien. Trots att vi, vad jag vet, spenderar mera pengar per elev än något annat land i världen när det gäller skolan. Och kvaliteten på svenska elever sjunker enligt universitetslärare. Det har varit flera artiklar under våren här där man säger att vi har elever som kommer till universitetet som knappt kan läsa och skriva och knappt kan tillgodogöra sig skriven information. Och enligt en timstudie för några år sedan här så säger man att svenska klassrum hör till de stökigaste i hela Europa. Och jag vet att många av det är vardag, för ni behöver inte se forskning på det här, men det är klart att det här bekymrar på något sätt. Och det för oss lite grann tillbaka till frågan, vad gör vi med våra barn och unga? Möter vi verkligen deras behov? Och då tänkte vi här att ska vi försöka bland alla de olika förklaringarna här att ge en ny infallsvinkel till det här och titta på barns behov och titta på vad de behöver och om det är någonting som vi missar i barns behov för att på så sätt försöka förstå vad som händer. Och när man försöker söka om det här så hittar man en massa olika vetenskapliga discipliner som en säger det och en säger det och en säger det. Inte alltid helt lätt att tränga in i och försöka förstå. Så att man kan fråga sig, finns det ingen som har sammanställt all den här kunskapen om barns behov i begriplig form? Ja, vi har hittat en sån. Vi har hittat Dr. Neufeld från Kanada som är en internationellt känd psykolog och författare från Vancouver. En del av er kan ha sett honom på Kunskapskanalen. När han var här sist i Sverige så filmades hela studiedagen och visades på Kunskapskanalen. Och sökte ni lite grann på internet, UR Play, Gordon Neufeld, så kan ni se en hel studiedag för lärare på 5 timmar på internet. Dr. Neufeld är en ovanlig psykolog på flera sätt. Han har 40 års klinisk psykologisk erfarenhet av allt från socialt välordnade medelklassfamiljer till de farligaste intagna inom kriminalvården i Kanada. Dessutom så har han en fullödig teoretisk skolning i psykologi. Och slutligen så gör han någonting som är väldigt ovanligt för psykologer. Han pratar om det. Psykologer tenderar ju vara liksom mer att de jobbar enskilt och säger inte så mycket om sitt arbete. Men det gör Dr. Neufeld. Han talar om det och han gör det dessutom på ett väldigt begripligt sätt. Så att den presentation som vi kommer att få höra här, det är Dr. Neufelds syntes av klassisk utvecklingspsykologi, en uppdaterad anknytningsteori och modern neurovetenskap. Och han har skapat en sammanhängande bild där vi kan förstå vad våra barn behöver för att kunna växa och utvecklas till sin fulla mänskliga potential, som är det som vi alla vill för våra barn, vare sig vi är föräldrar eller lärare eller andra. Dr. Neufeld är också medförfattare till boken Våga ta plats i ditt barns liv, som är översatt idag till 14 språk, jag tror det är 15 det är på gång. Och det är inget speciellt, det är inte så att det här är isolerat i Kanada, utan Dr. Neufeld har uppskattats av föräldrar och lärare i så vitt skilda länder som Kanada, Ryssland, USA, Tyskland, Sverige, Israel och Mexiko. Han har funnit någonting universellt om vad våra barn behöver som är begripligt för människor i en väldig massa olika länder. Och därmed så tyckte vi att Dr. Neufeld var rätt person att sammanfatta vad vi vet om barns och ungas behov idag för det här seminariet. Men vi behöver också ett svenskt perspektiv här, och därför har vi då satt samman en panel med svenska experter som kan lite grann återföra diskussionen till Sverige och se vad som är relevant och hur vi kan se på det här. Och vi kommer att ha Kerstin Udnäs Moberg som kommer här så småningom, som är professor hon jobbar med biologi, och hon är den som har lanserat hormonet oxytocin och hur viktigt det är. Vi vet alla om vi har kamp- och flykthormonet när vi är stressade, men vi vet också att blir vi stressade för länge så mår vi inte bra. Vad är det som neutraliserar stressen? Jo, oxytocin, det är hormonet som hon kallar för lugn- och rohormonet. Vi kommer att ha psykoterapeuten Louise Hallin som är känd för många från TV, som kommer att vara här. Och vi har John Steinberg som är känd i skolmiljön som pedagogdoktorn och har skrivit 50 böcker eller väl 48 böcker om pedagogik och inlärning. Så vi kommer att kunna återföra det här till det svenska perspektivet. Så. Då har jag äran att presentera allt är inte lätt när man ska använda någon annans dator. Så då är det dags för mig att presentera Dr. Gordon Neufeld. Dr. Neufeld, thank you for coming all the way from Vancouver, Canada, to us here in Sweden, and to give us a presentation about children's needs. And, as you've heard here in your translation, we really need to know about this. Please give Dr. Neufeld a warm welcoming applause. Och de bilderna som Dr. Neufeld visar kommer att finnas tillgängliga på nätet, så ni behöver inte skriva av dem allihop.
Thank you for that introduction and for inviting me back to Stockholm and for arranging it in June when Stockholm is at its best. I phoned to my wife last night, and she was very jealous. I think Stockholm is one of her favorite cities, and so she would have loved to have come with me, but we just had two new grandchildren, and so she could not leave her grandchildren. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about what I think should be on everybody's mind. I think everybody should be asking, what are the conditions that are required to bring children to their full potential as humans? This is my life question. I've committed my life to answering this question. I've been putting the pieces together for over 40 years as a therapist, as a clinician, as an academic, both the research and experience. And of course, from my point of view, that's the question that should be on every politician's mind, on every parent's mind, and so on. I see it very much like a gardener. I love gardening. Vancouver is very much like Stockholm in that sense, is that when it comes to spring gardens, we have wonderful spring gardens, and Vancouver is just alive right now with rhododendrons and azaleas, and the geraniums are coming, and all kinds of other flowers, and so on. And as I walk through my garden, I have this idea how is this plant doing? Is it realizing its full potential? Does it have enough light? What is the soil conditions? The hyacinths, are they coming to the color that I want them to come? And what are the conditions that are required for it to realize its full potential? And I walk through the neighborhood and see a garden where all of a sudden the same specimen of plant is doing much better there than in my garden, and I want to know what the secret is. And so, as gardeners, you talk to each other and you say, well, what do you do? What's the acidity of the soil? What's the percentage of light and dark, and what is the secret? And so I think this should be the buzz. This should be the concern for everybody. Is what are the conditions required for a children to grow into his full potential? And this question is cross-cultural. It doesn't matter what race. It doesn't matter what intelligence. It doesn't matter what color. It doesn't matter what nation. And it doesn't matter what period in history. I think this is the main thing. The main understanding is to understand what is this. And so I continue to try and study this question. Continue to try to put the pieces together, and I'm delighted to have an opportunity to speak to it. Not often am I asked to speak to this. I'm asked to speak all the time of what to do when a children misbehaves. And I don't like speaking on that, but that is what I'm asked to speak to. And so this is what I love to speak on, and so I appreciate that opportunity. And hopefully it will make sense. For me, this is the holy grail of psychology. This is the discovery of the secrets. This is the best kept secrets, I think. Hardly anybody talks about this because we speak in so many different languages, and I don't mean English and Swedish and so on. I mean just in so many different terminologies that it's hard to understand what is going on. And I think I am pleased to be the voice of developmental science here. And I do believe that developmental science now has the information required. We just have to articulate it, we just have to put words to it, and we just have to let it sink in. And as awareness grows, hopefully it will inform our parenting, it will inform our teaching, it will inform our caregiving, it will inform, hopefully, gradually our policies and procedures. Hopefully, in the future, we'll begin with the child, not the parent. We'll begin with asking the question, not whether the gardener has had enough time off, but whether the plants are really realizing their potential. Because when they are, the gardener is fulfilled. And I think we would all be fulfilled if we could see our children in that way. So by irreducible here, I mean basically incapable of further simplification. I don't know if that's true, if it's distilled to the essence. It continues to evolve for me as I push it more and more. at its essence, science is incredibly simple and complicated at the same time. But the challenge is to be able to bring it to the essence where if we can do this, then the application becomes universal. When we really understand the basic laws, the basic principles of the unfolding of human potential. This has been a question, of course, that psychologists have been concerned about for a long time. And then we lost that question as we became preoccupied with the question of how to get children to fit into society. But the societies that we were asking them to fit into weren't particularly healthy themselves. And so, and how to get children to behave, a totally different question than how to be able to bring them to their full potential. And so this is a question that we used to be asking, and now it's a question we're asking again as neuroscience takes over as the primary science in psychology. And neuroscience is studying the brain and how the brain can come to its potential, because every single child has, again, a certain potential to be realized. And we can actually study the effects directly on the brain of what happens when a child is facing separation, facing loneliness. What happens when there's stress, and we can see the effects directly on the brain. And when the prefrontal cortex, for instance, I'll be talking about, realizes its potential, when the bridge between the hemispheres realizes its potential. And so that now becomes a question about the most important organ in us, our brain. And so we can ask, how does the brain come to full potential? And we have answers. We're beginning to have answers for these things. So this is my topic. But the first thing that we need to do with this topic is to get some idea of what it is that we mean. What is our picture of full potential? What would it look like? And first of all, our question has to do with human potential. That is, what is distinctly human? What differentiates us from other primates, from other mammals? Our systems are remarkably the same. The limbic system, the emotional brain, is the same across all mammals. And so what differentiates, what is the key to fully realizing our human potential? Unique potential is very important too, that an individual can actualize his own talents and gifts and so on. But that is not the primary concern here. It is that we become fully human. We grow into our humanness. And like many phenomena, if you can, we represent a phenomena by a sphere, or in this case, because by a circle, is that it's not a linear question. But if we were going to reduce it to linear factors, then the smallest way of going around a phenomena is three, a triangle. And so you find theorists such as myself, we love to divide things into three. Because that means that we've surrounded the phenomena. And so in this case, we would ask the question, what are the three potentials? If we could distill it to three, we can't distill it to two because we don't join. Four is reducible. Three is irreducible. And so can we distill it to this? And so we find that I will just quickly review this. First of all, a separate being. Whether it's the cell, whether it's a plant, whether it's the atom, a molecule, or an individual, all development yearns towards the becoming viable as a separate, discrete being, able to function independently, stand on our own 2 feet, be able to have our own minds, our own thoughts, our own values, our own intentions, to be unique, to be individuated. There's many theories about this, and there's many misconceptions. There was a popular misconception in the 60s and 70s and 80s that is still around. I think it began in Britain, but I do not know. And this was that you have to teach a child to be separate. You have to teach a child to function independently. And it was okay for them to be dependent in the first year of life. But after that, you must never do anything for a child that they could or should do for themselves. There was a tremendous fear of dependence and the idea that you had to push independence. There was no trust in human nature to unfold this on their own. And so we have made a grave mistake this way because it is like in so doing, in hurrying independence, we actually harm the conditions that are required for a child to grow naturally to this. If the conditions are right, children spontaneously move to say, do it myself, move to try to think for their own thoughts, to have their own boundaries. A child will spontaneously divide the world into me and not me, mine and not mine. And so we made a huge mistake thinking that it was up to us to train independence, instead of that nature already had a plan, and that this plan would spontaneously unfold if the conditions were conducive. And so now we have huge problems with our youth, with our children, truly thinking for themselves, truly being separate, because we have not honored the conditions by which children get to that place. We think we have to push them. And that is always the mistake when we do not understand nature's way, is we think it's up to us. If we did that as gardeners, we'd be busy pulling our plants, stretching them every day, making sure that they knew where they were supposed to go. And of course, we would harm the conditions that would be required for their growth, which is their rootedness. And so every gardener knows is that you don't push growth. If you do so, you'll burn out the plant. And you don't put fertilizer. That right now, when I was a young gardener, I was very tempted when I got my flowering baskets, when I've got my bedding plants, and I was very tempted to put the fertilizer on that would bring flowers instead of that would grow the roots. And of course, the plant would burn out before the season ended. And that's exactly what is happening in a sense with our children, is instead of honoring the place from which they grow to their potential, we are pushing this. But this is the yearning of development. If the conditions are right, all yearning of the development in the fetus, in the womb, is, if the conditions are right, the fetus is moving to the birth. And the birth is that time when nature has deemed that the child is viable as a separate being biologically. And so that is the idea. I often think that it's very fortunate that we haven't been able to get inside the womb and give instructions to the child, or we'd mess that one up too. You know, is that we must let it unfold naturally. An adaptive being. Human beings are the most adaptive of all creatures. If the conditions are right, this is spontaneous. We can adapt to the most circumstances, to the widest variety of conditions. We can adapt to even having only one of our hemispheres in the brain working, to severe brain damage, to losing our limbs. We can adapt to being blind, to being deaf. We can adapt to having one parent. We can adapt to all kinds of things, to poverty and to do those things, but it requires a process. It is spontaneous, but it is not inevitable. And so that is, if everything is right, then what we cannot change will change us. That is the key to transformation, is if everything is right, and if I cannot change my circumstances, then my circumstances will change me. And if it's adaptive, it will change me for the better. If I'm not adaptive, it will change me for the worse. And so that is the issue of human adaptation and transformation. And we'll take a look at that and that process there. As you know, many of our children are no longer adapting. The 10 syndromes that children are diagnosed with most are all syndromes of non-adaptation. They are not adapting to the things that are wrong in their brain, in their body. And that is more significant than the syndrome itself, is whether or not they can overcome their blindness, not see, but the brain can find a way around. In the brain, we actually call it plasticity, neural plasticity, the ability of the brain to find workarounds for what it is that doesn't work. And we vary tremendously in this, but this is our potential. And then thirdly, we as human beings are a social being. We love togetherness. Look at us here. We love togetherness. We come together. You know, togetherness is what we seek. But in terms of our social being, our potential is because we also are moving to separateness to be our own persons at the same time as togetherness. So our potential is to be able to do togetherness and separateness simultaneously. And that is the key to egalitarian values. That is the key to true democracy. That is the key to considerateness, to being responsible, to being civilized, to being tempered. Now, this is no easy thing. For those of you that are married, you know in marriage, that separateness is you want to be your own being, and that's important. And you wouldn't be married unless togetherness was important. You want to belong, to be special to each other, to matter to each other. You seek to be with each other. And so there's a huge desire for togetherness and a huge longing for separateness. Now, that is very difficult to do simultaneously. How do we do togetherness at the same time as separateness? For some of us, it will take 2 or 3 marriages to get how this works. It's not an easy thing to do, and you can see that it's a lifelong process. You can see how ridiculous it is that we are pressing our 3- and 4-year-olds to be social and to get along. They don't even know yet how to be their own persons. It is premature. First of all, you have to become your own person before you will automatically treat others as separate beings. If you don't, we'll have great difficulty with this. We've known this for hundreds of years. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, the key to democracy is not that it's taught from the outside, not that a nation does this. The key to democracy is if a child becomes a separate being, truly knows their own mind, their ideas, and has their own steering wheel and decisions, they will automatically treat others as separate beings, and the spirit of democracy will be preserved. This is not something that is a doctrine that you can impose from the outside. It is not something you learn in school. It is something that is grown. It is homegrown. And you in Sweden and we in Canada are very, very concerned with what it is that is the key to democracy. What is the key to relating together with each other as equals, as separate beings? And it is in the development of the child. It is in every child's potential. The state does not have to worry so much. If we had children, if we had even 10% of our population that were moving to realize their potential as human beings, it would be a marvelous thing. It would be the seasoning of our societies and our cultures. And we would find all the things we're yearning for would be able to come here. Robert Bly, the poet laureate of the United States, wrote in Sibling Society that the primary concern of our time is primarily that we are not growing into our potential as human beings. And he saw this was epidemic. Where is the maturity these days? Where are the people that we could truly say are representative of this? Where are these individuals? These are the individuals we should be electing to govern us. These are the individuals that should be in leadership. And where are these individuals? And this is the greatest concern. And so this is a bit of what potential looks like. But the next question is what are the conditions that are required for children to grow into this, spontaneously grow into this potential? And that is the question of every true developmentalist. Now, developmental is used in two ways today. Developmental means that you're basically dealing with children. When I say I'm a developmentalist psychologist, most of them think that my primary focus is children, which is true, but it is also an approach. And in this case, an approach, it's the question that one has, and every developmentalist has, if they're truly a developmentalist at heart or a gardener at heart, is what are the conditions that are required for children to grow to their own potential. I have 5 children and 5 grandchildren. My children are all adults now, and then 5 grandchildren. And of course, that is at the very core of my yearnings as a father and a grandfather as well, is that my children and grandchildren would all come to realize their full potential as human beings. And so that's what I want to share with you. This material throughout the day today, and I have brought this material to organize it around essential experiences. What needs to happen for human potential to be realized? What does the child need to experience? Whether they're poor, whether they're rich, whether they're colored, whether they're white, whether they're in Sweden, whether they're in Canada, whether they lived 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or today, whether they go to school, whether they don't go to school. What are the questions? And this is a much different kind of question than what most people are asking. They're asking questions of economics, of comparing this, of whether we're haves or have-nots, and so on. This question cuts across all of those things. It has to do with what are the essential experiences for that a child needs to have, regardless of where they live, at what age they live, regardless of their mental capacity. What needs to happen for human potential to be realized? Now, the answers are surprising. And they're surprising because, for the most part, we've been thinking as adults about adults. We think of adults in terms of what gets one adult ahead and what differentiates one from the other. And in actual adults, the answers that come to us are much different than when we start with children. And this was the great discovery of Piaget, one of the greatest developmentalists who ever lived. And Piaget discovered that children were not just little adults. What we think of them is we can make them become little adults as quick as we can and push them into adulthood, then all will be well. And again, human nature is not like this. The seed is very, very different than the final outcome. If we tried to produce carrots and use the same process we do with getting children to be the way it is, then we would get our best clay, we get our best artists to be able to form carrots and apples and all of these kinds of things, and then we'd hope somehow it would come to life. And as well as we know, artificial fruit looks beautiful. There's not a blemish to it at all, but it nurtures no one. The apple seed looks nothing like the apple. The carrot seed looks nothing like it. The processes of growth look nothing like the outcome. And this is where we've made a mistake as humans. We think if we can get the outcome, we want a child to behave, we want a child to do well, to perform in school, we want a child to be able to learn, then we work directly at that. And so now we have our governments, our states are working directly at outcome, thinking that if we push towards this, we'll have success. So we already know that before children go to school, they have this incredible curiosity. They want to know about their world. By the time they've been in school for 2 years, nobody wants to know about the world anymore. And we have more children curious the first year of school than we have in the last year. In fact, we have hardly anybody curious at all by the time school is finished. So what happens when we teach children and we destroy their desire to learn? We are not making headway. And this is only one example of what we're doing. What we're trying to do when we push the things is we're moving past the natural processes. We need to work with nature. We need to be a midwife of this process. But we need to understand it first, because if we don't understand it, we simply think linearly to go to the outcome. So these are surprising. These are surprising elements. They do not come naturally when we think as an adult. We have to think as a child. Think in terms of children, of how they come to flourish, how they come to realize their potential. But when we think that way, virtually all the developmentalists, the thinkers on this way to start, they converge. There is little controversy. Once you start from that place and you actually ask, what are the conditions that are required for a children to grow into his or her potential, the answers come together. And the first answer is a very surprising answer to us, because it's something we consider not essential at all, and that is play. Play, we think, is something that just you fit in between work. But work is how you get someplace, right? That's our whole concept of work. Work is how you get to an outcome. So surely the answer to realizing our potential is to work. And so somebody needs to work hard to learn to do school work, and the earlier you learn to work, the better it will be. And the answer we find for all mammals is play. All offspring of mammals play, and as soon as we deprive the play, we've got problems. And one of the big concerns today is that play, true play, and I'll define it, true play is an endangered activity in our children today. True play, they are losing this. In fact, we have watered down the whole construct of play. Most of the time when we use the word play, it has nothing to do with true play. Our sports playoffs have nothing to do with this. Nintendo games have nothing to do with true play. Video games have nothing to do with play. And playing the piano may have nothing to do with play. It may have everything to do with preparing for a performance, which, as any of us know, is not play at all. And so this is, and what we say that happens in recess and lunch hour when we send our children to play, that is not play. If you look back at that time in your own life, that will be at the time of the most stress, actually, is the interaction, the most wounding. It is not a time of play. And so we get this wrong. So what is play? What is play? And again, every true developmentalist starts at this place. This is key. In fact, you can get a PhD now in psychology in play. And in fact, you could study all there is about play. You get a PhD, and there's still a whole lot more. This is at the very, very, very fore of our development is play. Now, what is true play? If you think of if you go to take your car into in for servicing, and let's say the motor is there, and you're looking at the pistons or something else that's mechanical. That is the very essence of it. They will say, well, is there some play in the mechanism? Is there some play, or is it all seized up? And by play in the mechanism, they mean, does it move or operate freely in a bounded space? And so you can think of this as will it move or operate freely in a bounded space? And so there's a freedom of operation. And when we look at it, the very essence of play is freedom from repercussions. There is a freedom from consequence, freedom from repercussions that is absolutely essential, but it has to happen in a bounded space. It's a spontaneous activity that cannot be taught or commanded. You can't teach a person to play. You can't teach them it happens spontaneously. You can't say to yourself, I need to play now. And what happens is play. You can't say to a child, go play, and play results. It just doesn't happen that way. It cannot be commanded. It is an absolute spontaneous activity. a wolf cub, a bear cub. Again, every mammal, the primary activity that is not involved in survival needs will be play. And we find in our research that when we look at the disturbed and the delinquent, there is a marked absence of play. It is absolutely essential for our health and well-being, and children must experience a lot of that. So what is true play? Well, I'll use again the phenomena of play and the three sides to it. And first of all, it's not work. It's not work. As soon as it's work, it's not play. And so the two are very, very much the opposite. And what is the difference between work and play? In play, work is all about outcome. Work is all about getting someplace, getting to a certain end result. Play is not about outcome. It is about the activity. Play for play's sake. It has to do with the activity that engages. If a child is learning in play, it is learning for learning's sake. It is not about the results. It's all about learning. Curiosity is play. It is absolutely play. As soon as the play goes out of a child, the curiosity is dimmed. As soon as the play goes out of the learning, the curiosity is dimmed. How many children go to school to learn? They do the minimum they need to do, that they have to do to keep out of trouble. Many of them go there to be with their friends, but do they go to school in the morning saying, I'm so excited, I get to learn more about my world today? I can hardly wait. And then we push even more. We take what happens and we push more. We don't say to ourselves, what is happening? What's going wrong? We should have children who are very excited about this. Something is unfolding that's not right. And so it's in play, it's the activity. What engages is the activity, and where the fun is the activity. And in work, it's all the outcome. What we do to get to the outcome is not always fun. And I am one of the very, very fortunate individuals whose work is my play, and play is my work. And so this is something I decided when I was in high school what I would do for my work, my vocation, and I've never got there yet. I still am playing. And it is wonderful because, and I find for myself, I find the same thing as Google has found for its employees. And what Google does is it has a 10% rule. If 10% of your time at the job is not in play, then you will not be creative. It finds that all creativity happens not when you're at work, but when you're at play. And so you must have 10% of your activity. I think this would be a wonderful thing. I say this to my staff, in the Neufeld Institute. You've got to preserve your fun quotient. If you lose that, then you will burn out. 10% should be there. If you're doing something you desire, you must preserve that. But there needs to be play, and in some of the leading industry are actually deciding their people need to play. Now again, you can't legislate this, and so it has to come, but you can take the repercussions off, and so on. We think that the harder we work, the more we'll get towards our goal, and in actual fact, nature shows us that's not true. That's not true. That's not our way our brains are meant to operate. We'll burn them out very quickly. We're burning out our children. We're burning out our societies. We're not preserving what is required. It is not for real. Play is not for real. It's not in the real world. I mean, you can be sisters, and then you can play being sisters, and you can be the same. I mean, you know when you have children and they're screaming bloody murder, and you say, what's wrong? Nothing, we're just playing. Okay? We're just playing. They're playing fighting, and they're playing this. The mammals play fight all the time. They play fight, and when they play fight, the cats, the claws are not out. And they're going and they're practicing all the maneuvers, all the things. If kittens didn't play, they would never realize their potential in terms of what they have to do. They must. They must. And this is one of the most important things. There must be pretend. There must be the ability to be able to suspend reality, because that is where development has its head start, is when it's not for real. And we're pushing our children into the world of reality. We push them way too soon. And some of them try to hang on with imaginary friends and with this and try to preserve this because that's what they absolutely require. But we do this. It's not for real, and it's expressive and exploratory. Being entertained is not play because it's not expressive. It's not exploratory. Yes, it's not for real, and yes, it's not work. Reading a book, yes, it's not work, not for real, but it is not expressive, it's not exploratory. Sitting in front of screens is not play. It is not play. Playing Nintendo games, video games are not play, because all games, other than very, very few, are outcome-based. And so video games to play are outcome-based. You're going for results. And the results are to win. The results are to do this. That is not play. Play is not going for an outcome. So you can see the difference. Now, we did used to have some games on screens that were play. Perhaps the Myst was a good example of this. Myst, M-Y-S-T. I don't know if the game is played anymore. My children loved it. There were some others, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego and so on. There were some other games that were about play, but in all the efforts to get outcome and to push learning, play has disappeared. And so it is relatively rare that you can get screen games that are about play. So this is what play, this is the essence of play. Now, what is it for? Actually, Plato, in ancient Greece, Plato said it most eloquently. And again, Plato, in ancient Greece, the question was, and the same question that are trying to answer here. And so this is a very old question, over 2,500 years old. And Plato, in his observation, said that play is absolutely essential. If we lose play, we lose the very essence and the forward movement into the potential as human beings. Because for the first time in a while, there was some peace, some freedom, enough room to be able to ask these kinds of questions and reflect on these questions. And so he defined play as a leap of joy and delight. A leap out of the constraints of real life, a leap into settings or frames not yet entered into in real life. In this case, he absolutely nailed it. He got to the essence of this. It's amazing, his intuitive understanding of play. We now know in developmental science that play is the growing edge of development. It is the growing edge of development. It is where emotion is expressed without repercussion. Now, this is very important. Humans are creatures of emotion. In fact, all mammals are creatures of emotion. We call it the limbic system, the emotional brain. It's one of the oldest parts of our brain, and it must be preserved. And emotion means to move. To in Latin, motion, move, and it moves us. We used to think that the brain was a blank slate, and that we could simply teach children how to behave by following it up with consequences. That if we wanted this to happen, we rewarded it. If we didn't want action to happen, we would give it an aversive consequence, unpleasant consequence. And we thought we could shape children this way. And now we realize, and from all the study in neuroscience, that there are tens and scores and in fact hundreds of movements that are pre-wired in our emotional brain. We are moved to moved to, and the whole issue of maturation, the issue is that emotion is the engine of maturation. If our emotions do not move, we do not grow up. Our emotions must move. Now that's a problem. We are moved in all kinds of ways. The child is moved to cry. The child is moved to attack. The baby is moved to do this. And it's very messy and uncivilized. And so we must find a way that the child can move in play. And we're not getting this. We're not realizing that children must have their emotions, and the way they do this is they play at, in pretend. They must do this so they can have all of their emotions, their anger and their frustration and their alarm and their panic, and they must have all of those in play. Otherwise they don't get to develop a relationship with those emotions, and they never, and we'll talk about this later, develop their capacity for emotional health and development. And so immediately when we do not give enough room for play and for children to have their emotions, and of course we don't in our society, we crowd them into spaces with each other. We focus on behavior, and the first thing we say to them is be nice, get along, don't hurt anybody. And then we give no opportunity to play all of those things where their emotions can be there and they can move. And we are running our children right into disturbance. Those of you, I don't know if any of you are play therapists here, but play therapists, the main therapy with all children is to get their emotions back. And you give them a context, a sandbox, and you give them other kinds of things where they can play out their emotions, and in playing out their emotions they come back to health. And that is the key thing of this. And we're not getting this. We're all about outcome. We're all about learning numbers and words. We're all about performance. We're all about getting along. And we're not about play. And again, we think we're going to make little adults out of them. We're going to get them as soon as they can to be little adults, instead of allowing them to be children so they can naturally come to adulthood. And what they need to experience is very different. So emotion must be expressed without repercussion. And we are continually saying to children, don't hit, for instance. We're saying cut it out. Don't scream. We're not saying, here, let me help you get that emotion out. Let's go have a game. Let's go play where that thing can come out. We don't think that way. We think that we must get it out. In fact, for hundreds of years, emotion has been considered a nuisance variable. In fact, some of the greatest writers, John Locke, considered that children should be punished for displaying emotion. And we kind of discarded it, thinking that we were rational creatures and that thinking should take precedence over feeling. And you can see we've gone wrong. We've gone very wrong in this. It's where the brain's problem-solving networks are programmed. This has been revolutionary. That we used to think the brain was like a computer, and that the more stimulation you gave it, the more it grew. And we found out we were completely wrong. We thought that if we sent it, we put tasks, the brain had to be exercised, and we gave it tasks to learn, instruction and schooling, that the brains would grow bigger. We find the brains didn't grow at all. That the brains only grow in play. And they grow, the brain is not an information processor. It is not a computer. The brain is essentially a problem solver. And the way you solve problems, first of all, to solve a problem, there must be no repercussions. You must be free of outcome, otherwise the pressure is too great. If you've got to get something right, the child is doomed. And how many of our children have to get it right? If you can play around, I remember this idea. I was having great difficulty in grade 5 with long division. and I was having great difficulty. I simply could not get it, and I was struggling with long division. And then my grade 5 teacher, a master teacher, said, Gordon, you have to play with the numbers. Well, I didn't understand what he meant. I was trying to get it right. I was trying desperately to get it right. That was the only thing I was concerned about. I really liked Mr. Peterson. I was quite attached to him. And he said, well, why don't you come in for 20 minutes before class starts in the morning and just play with the numbers on the board. Just have fun with them. And I did that. And after about 2 weeks of that, I had the most wonderful eureka experience. I discovered the law of the conservation of numbers. And it was the basis of my scientific career. That was the basis of everything, but it came in play. So many of us have problems with math because we've never had the freedom. We try to learn it. And you can't learn it. The true mathematicians, you go into it and they've played. They've played and they've discovered these things. And the true scientists, when you look at them, and there's research on the MacArthur Fellows and the scientists, they've played in their childhood. They played with these things. And that's where the discoveries have come. The discoveries have been in their play, not their work. Again, the brain's problem-solving networks are created in play. School uses the brains that play has produced. We cannot actually create brain growth in school. Do you follow me? We cannot actually do this. We can burn brains out. We cannot produce growth. The growth happens during play, and it's where problem-solving networks are connected, and then school uses it. So we've got to get our priorities straight. We've got to figure this out because we have decided that the answer to human potential is school. The earlier, the better. And all civilized countries are moving in this direction because it's the thing they can control. But there is no respect and no regard for human nature here. We've already been designed in a certain way. Something needs to unfold this way. It's, of course, in all traditional cultures, it's where life skills are practiced and honed. Whether it's a hunting culture, whether it's an agricultural culture, all the things that are necessary to live in that culture are all reproduced in play. And we have lost that as well. We have lost that it's where the creative edge is most likely to occur. That's why companies like Google that are always wanting to think outside the box. It's why the most advanced companies are trying to create play opportunities for theirs. It's why most of the movie companies have created huge rooms and places around it. I understand BMW has done this as well. Is they're creating these spaces because they want the forward edge. They want the most creative ideas, and they can't get them from pushing their employees. They get them out of play. Where life can be practiced in a space free of consequence. And this is so important because we have brought consequence into the very earliest years of life. We start teaching child, if you do this, then this will happen. We start saying if you don't eat your peas, you won't be healthy. If you don't brush your teeth, they'll fall out. And we start building consequence into 2- and 3-year-olds. Their brain doesn't think this way. We wonder why they don't get it. They don't get it because they're not consequence-based. That's a work motif. That doesn't even click in for at least 6 years. And we're not honoring the first 6 years of life that are governed by the play motif. If you want them to eat their peas, then make it fun. If you want them to pee into the toilet, then make it fun. It's easy to do that. You get a little bit of dye in the toilet, it changes color. There's all kinds of ways we can do this. We're not understanding the minds of young children and how they operate. Once you do this, it's fairly easy. It's just like magic because they're meant to be free of consequence. We're meant to give them that head start into life. We're not giving them that head start anymore. We want to get them as quick as possible to work, and then we're wondering why we're burning our children out. Why all the results by the time they're adolescents is there's not a bit of play in them at all. Not a bit of play. And the play motif, as I say, governs the child for the first 6 years of life and needs to be supported if potential is to be realized. But we would need to believe in it. There's very few people anymore who believe in this and believe in nature, that nature had a way. We're thinking that we know better. But instead of respecting this, again, our job is to be midwives to this process, as we are to be to the birthing process. We're getting contrived, we're getting too sophisticated, and we're losing the sense of what nature has in mind. And so the play motif governs the child. The more room they have for this, my last child, my last of my 5, had the most room for this play as I think I matured as a father, and I was less and less interfering with this, more and more making room for this. My first child, I made as neurotic as I was. Had to work, everything had to work, and I relaxed a little bit by the time the 5th child came around. That's why I think everybody should have at least 5. You get it out of your system and you say, oh, it will unfold. How many 16-year-olds do you know that are still wetting their diapers and so on? It unfolds and it's okay and you can relax. And as a grandparent, I'm much more relaxed, but you can't start out that way. But I made lots of room for play, and the more room I made for play, the more I realized that he needed to play and play and play. In fact, he had a game. He played hide and go seek. It's one of the essential children's games, and the games in which they face separation. And they face separation in play. And facing separation is the hardest thing we all have to face, is separation. What if I'm not seen? What if I'm not found? What if nobody knows that I exist? What if nobody cares enough to come and get me? Do you follow me? This we find is the one, and that's why hide and seek is in every child's repertoire. And they play it over and over again. And Braden had to play it right until he was 9 years of age. I never understood why, but I knew I must, and I must indulge it. And every evening we played this, and he got more and more sophisticated. But I knew I must always find him. Because if I didn't find him, if I was too tired or I didn't want to play this, I could not help him resolve the biggest alarm that every human being has to face. You see, I knew by that time that this is nature's way. Our children are filled with alarm. They've never played with separation. They've never come to deal with this. They've never resolved it. These things are meant to resolve in this. I remember as a child playing with my parents' death. We used to gather as siblings into the closet, and we'd plan how we would be and not be with our least favorite uncles and aunts and with our most favorite and all of these things. And we played with surviving our parents' deaths. And we played and we played and we played. And I believe now that it was important in the process of being able to do this. But we played at it. We had time. We had space. There was the opportunity to do so. In children's lives today, there's little time. There's little space. There's no room for this because they must get ahead. And we push them in every which way to get ahead. There's no room to be able to come to terms. Nature has a way of being able to do these. Our children are not experiencing them. There is a special kind of play, a very special kind of play we call emergent play. An emergent play is when a child has had enough contact and closeness, has been satiated with love and belonging. Parents have been able to satisfy the huge hunger for togetherness. That when the hunger for togetherness is satisfied, the child spontaneously moves to separateness. It's a beautiful thing to watch. All you have to do, and it goes the opposite of what you think. And so you give the child a sense of wonderful togetherness, meeting all of that need for togetherness, a sense of belonging, a sense of significance, a sense that you'll hold on to them forever, that nothing could ever separate them from your love, and so on. You give this to them, this sense of it, and then the brain says, it's almost like, oh, thank you. That's what we're looking for. Is we need the togetherness to be answered. And then the amygdala, the gear shift of the limbic system,
and the emotional brain shifts gears from first gear to second gear, and the child ventures forth into the most amazing emergent play, a play that's truly play for play's sake, a place of curiosity, a place of discovery, a place of exploration. You can't make it happen. A place of of wonderful discovery. And this is what I was able to provide for my youngest two sons more than anything. And they're both now on their way to becoming, one at Harvard in his PhD in neuroscience there, but all through coming science there. But it was all based on the play of their childhood, I believe. I respected the natural processes rather than interfering so much. I could be a midwife to this. And the other one is in engineering science and biomedicine, still loving to play, loving to put ideas together, all based on that. This is the emergent play, characterized by venturing forth energy, curiosity, creativity, and exploration. It is a setting in which boundaries are first formed, interests are developed, a sense of agency is cultivated, the integrative process is primed, and a sense of self is solidified. This is where a child gets his hand on the steering wheel. This is literally called a sense of agency, from Latin, at the chariot seat. And a child is born on the passenger seat of life. Life happens to them. But in play, in this emergent play, gets to feel as if he's at the steering wheel. You get a 3 or 4-year-old who has lots of play. They just want steering wheels all over the place. And they're busy wanting to steer. And then as soon as they start steering, their life begins to divide into options, this way or that way. And as soon as they realize that, they now have a sense of accountability for what occurs when they steer. We're seeing so many children without any sense of accountability. We have so many adults around who are trying to make them accountable, but that's not how you get it. You can't make anybody responsible. They had to grow into it. Where did they grow into it? In play. And we've got to go back to being able to recover that place when they discover and move into that place. And it's a place where the sense of self is solidified. They have a sense of their self. This is one of the things in Braden, who went to one of the top engineering schools in the world. And that school prides itself in making their students work harder than any other university. And I didn't like the sound of that. And now he's just graduated. In fact, that's one of my reasons my wife isn't here, is he came home exhausted, absolutely burnt out, but at least with the instincts to say, I've just got to sit with myself. I got to find myself. I got to find my play. Everything has been taken out of me in this university. He has now become an expert in things. He is desirable, but the spirit is gone. And so he has to recover. He has to find this place, because it is in the play where that will come. It's a brief window in time where the basic needs of the child are satisfied and where there's an absence of competing activities. It is a brief window of time, just like physical hunger. That takes preeminence. If a child is hungry, then everything is about food. If a child is hungry in terms of their need for togetherness, then everything is about togetherness. Mommy, where are you going? Can't you be here? Can't you stay with me? What's happening now? And everything is about togetherness. But when the togetherness is satisfied, when a child can take it for granted, the venturing forth happens. It is part of the plan. We're so concerned that we have to push independence, and yet it would all happen if we only relaxed and provided for the needs of togetherness. If we did this, the rest would unfold absolutely naturally. It's a brief window in time. How long does a young child, when you feed a child, how long will that child not need food or be hungry? Maybe 2 hours, 3 hours at the most. The same is true with this venturing forth energy. A child doesn't have to stay in this place. It's just a brief window when the needs for togetherness have been sufficiently satisfied that there is this room for venturing forth. Again, this requires some faith in that process. I'm going to introduce my next place just before we have a break. So what is it that supports play? Why do some children play and not others? Why are we losing the place of play in our society? Why are we more preoccupied? We call all kinds of things play that are not play because they're outcome-based. But this true play is a place that comes from the inside. It's a way of movement. Why are children showing less and less and less of it? Why is it an endangered activity? The question is what supports this? What supports this? Now, this is another surprising answer. And again, it's surprising because it goes so much against prevailing practice, prevailing thought. But if you start with play, it will become obvious. If you start with play, you already know intuitively what supports this. And the best word that I can find for it is rest. The best word is rest. Rest is amazing. It's amazing. Again, it's the opposite of work. But we know that rest is absolutely foundational to the development of the brain, to the healthy realization of the potential of the brain, to functioning at every step of the way. It's rest, not work. Now, there's an irony to this. When I moved to become a senior therapist, and I was just basically working with other therapists as a therapist of therapists before I retired from my work as a therapist. And I would have therapists who would come to me from all over and say, I would like to come to see you as a therapist, and I'd like to work on my issues. And they were always saying, work. I'd like to work at my issues. I said, well, I've assumed that you've been working at them for a while. Has it helped you to grow up at all? Obviously, you're coming to me and you're asking me to help you with your work. You're coming to the wrong place. I hope that you can find within our relationship a place of rest. Because if you can find a place of rest, you'll find it will resolve itself. We can't grow ourselves up. We can't just will it and it will happen. We can't just work at our issues. We can't work. It doesn't happen that way. It all happens from a place of rest. And if that's true for us as adults, how much more true is it for children? And so there is literature that relates automatically rest and growth. Well, first of all, take a look at that. And again, it's a surprising answer if you don't start at play. Once you start at play, it seems obvious. What is the relationship of rest to growth? And in putting all the pieces together here, it's very simple. All true growth emanates from a place of rest. All true growth emanates from a place of rest. It includes physical growth. Do you know that children grow at night? Not during the day? They grow at night. That is, if they're sleeping. You know that all brain growth happens during periods of rest. The brain has a resting cycle that is extremely important. It is where restoration is happening. Without sleep, most of us would start hallucinating in 4 days. Without rest, our brain cannot function. Rest becomes absolutely essential. You know how many children are not being able to find that place of rest? How many of us are actually burning out? We go to our doctors with chronic illnesses. We find we're an adrenal gland burnout. We're not having enough of that rest activity in our life. It's not just a matter of work. It's a psychological place that we're having great difficulty with. Same with emotional growth, as well as psychological maturation. Rest is facilitated by what we call the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system, the part that's not under your direct control, is divided into two parts. The sympathetic, which is the psychology of work, and the parasympathetic, which is the psychology of rest. And these must cycle back and forth. But we often get stuck in sympathetic nervous system activity, and that there's not the rest. And if there's not the rest, there's not the recovery, there's not the growth, there's not the growing into our potential. And all the endocrines are different, the neurotransmitters are different. Our physiology is different. You can tell this when you're in parasympathetic nervous system activity. The blood goes into the digestive system, away from the peripheral. The eyes present differently. You can very much experience, if you know this, usually you can stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system by having a workout. That is, if you can get the cycle. So if you work to exhaustion, and then the parasympathetic nervous system will click in. That's why very many individuals can only find that's the only way they can get there, is that they must get there through exercise. But it's meant to cycle naturally. And restlessness is indicative of the inability to find true rest. Our children are becoming more restless. One of the leading diagnoses has restlessness at its key. Attention deficit disorder has restlessness as one of the three criteria, two of which of the three, distractibility, restlessness, and impulsiveness. Two of the three must be there to be diagnosed. And we're finding that restlessness is escalating, absolutely escalating. That 1 in every 5 children in North America qualifies for this diagnosis. This is a phenomenal increase. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the brain. At least the leading thought on this is that, yes, there are some neurological reasons for some of them, but this is way over-diagnosed simply because our children are experiencing restlessness. This is not a personality trait. This is a result of not being able to find true rest. That's what we'll move on to discuss this more, but this would be a good time to take a 15-minute break. Let's take a 15-minute break here and then resume.